This is part 2 of the knife build. We're going to cut the profile out and grind in the bevels. Hi guys, I'm Aaron with Aleeknives. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time visiting and you want to learn more about knife making and cool tips and tricks for metalworking, you should start right now by hitting that subscribe button and then ring the bell notification so you're notified of all my future content. Alright, so we went ahead and drew up our design right there. Let's cut it out. As for the layout, take a piece of steel, take your template, lay it on your piece of steel. There's a couple different ways you could do this. You could take spray paint and just shoot over it. Put a couple magnets on your template so it doesn't move. Sometimes the force of the spray paint can move that. That's if you have time. If you don't have time, I use blue Dykem, which is a layout fluid right here. Dykem, it's a layout fluid, and I paint this on my piece of steel. I just paint it on. You don't have to paint it everywhere, just where you're gonna need your lines. It's real easy, and the reason that I use this stuff is because it dries super quick, so there isn't a long period of time where you're gonna be waiting around waiting for it to dry. That should be good enough. This is not an exact science. This is... There we go. I showed you this because if this is your first knife, you probably don't have Dykem laying around, so go ahead and use the spray paint method. And then when we go in to grind in the bevels, we need to mark the edge. I'll use Dykem again, but you could just use a black Sharpie. That works out great. Okay, so let me let that dry for a second. I'm gonna come around, we'll lay this on there and I'll trace around it. Take your scribe around. I don't even really get too close to it. You know, this is what I was talking about how knife making is a fluid art. These are just reference lines. There we go. Good enough. We're going to start the profiling now, and I'm going to go ahead and take a 4.5-inch angle grinder with the cutoff wheel and cut off the majority of this material before we move on to refining the profile. What I do think is important always when you're working in the shop is personal protective equipment. So that's why I'm wearing this guy right here. I put my hood up. I like to wear a shop apron. It protects me from any metal pieces that are flying around. get that going on. I wear a respirator like this. And I wear safety glasses right there. Now we're for the next part, I'm going to take this rough profile right here. It's rough. It's got chunks and spurs and stuff sticking out everywhere. It kind of looks like a knife right now. There we go. You can see it against the background. Ooh, there it is. I'm going to take this and I'm going to clean it up and I'm going to refine the profile. There's a lot of different ways that you could do this. You can throw this in a vise and draw file it with just files if that's all you have. You could clean it up further with the angle grinder with the grinding disc. You could do that. You can buy a cheap 1x30 belt sander from Harbor Freight. That's probably going to be your best method at getting the profiling done on the cheap, is one of those little 1x30 belt sanders. Or you can use a 2x72, which is what I'm going to do. I would actually do this on a 1x30 to show you. It's essentially the same thing as using my 2x72, or you could use one of those 4-inch belts or a 6-inch belt. Any type of belt sander that you can come up with would work great for this. And I'm going to bring in here, one of the best things that a belt sander can do is it can give you a work surface that's 90 degrees to the belt, and that's huge in knife making. You really want to keep this 90 degrees and crisp enough to cut you. If this is rounded over, then it's never going to make a good, nice, crispy edge when you put your handle scales on. And that's what you're really looking for in knife making. For a good finished product is when your scales are on, there's no gaps, it's crispy. It's really nice and clean. And you achieve that by keeping a 90-degree edge right here throughout the entire process. These corners back here, if you don't want the end rounded completely over, you need to keep those sharp. They're not going to feel good in your hand when they're sharp, when it's just a piece of metal, but once you put the handle scales on and then refine the scales, that will not dig into your hand anymore. So I'm going to bring you in, I'm going to show you my work surface that I use to keep this at 90 degrees, and let's get this ground in. In this stage of the process, you want to make sure that you get this profile completely dialed in. The next thing we're going to do is drill these pinholes. This is crucial. The reason I didn't mark my pinholes is because when you're profiling and you're feeling it in your hand, sometimes these lines that you drew out weren't accurate to how it should feel in your hand. You might take a little more material off here, maybe a little more material off the top. And if you measured on your design and put your pin placements, and then you took off more material on one side or the other, your pin would not be in the middle anymore. So I wait to mark my pins out until I've got the profile completely set and where I want it. Once I get the profile where I want it, now we'll go over, we'll put some layout dye on here and we'll mark out those pin placements and get them drilled. I'm gonna go ahead and say, let's go 500, let's go 1/2 inch. That's good enough right there, 1/2 inch. So right there, 1/2 inch from the front of the scale, 1/2 inch from the butt of the knife. That's going to be the center of my front and my back pin. Whatever size pin that I decide to go with. Now, I'm going to take this measurement here, right here. Oddly, that's 1/2 inch, which doesn't normally work out like that, but it did on this one. So that vector right there is going to be where we put that pin. Take that right there. Oops. That vector is going to be the center pin. Then what we're going to do is we're going to measure between there and there. Perfect. Right there's the middle. There it is right there. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and mark out front, center. Oh man, it bounced on me. For this particular build, I've decided to use a 1/4 inch black linen micarta pin stock. The pin options for knife making are unlimited. You can use micarta, G10, you can use brass, nickel silver, stainless steel, you name it. They've got all kinds of different things out there that you can use. The big deal here is to make sure that you've got the right size drill bit for the pin stock that you choose for the knife that you're building. Like I said, I decided to go a full 1/4 inch on these. This is just black pin stock right here. I've gone ahead and roughed it up. I just took it, pushed my finger against the sanding belt and roughed it up, just to kind of clean it up. When you're drilling a knife, I would strongly suggest that you clamp it down. Here's why. If you're drilling into this and the drill bit catches the steel, it's going to fling this knife around like a helicopter blade, okay? That's not good. Now, when I do my larger knives, where the blade's much longer, I don't clamp it down. Here's because if it does catch on a larger blade, say it's this big, and it spins, it's just going to hit the stanchion of the drill press and it's not going to go any farther. But on these smaller knives, You can either take your chances or you can clamp it down. Here we go. Looks good. You could address the burrs a couple different ways. I used to take this right over to the sanding belt and sand those, but I found out that puts sanding scratches on my finish, and since I buy the precision ground steel, it costs me a lot of extra work. So now what I do is I just put a larger drill bit in my drill press and chamfer the holes with it. And all we're doing is knocking the burr off. That's it. Perfect. Now for the part where we actually start making a knife. We're going to now focus on grinding in the bevels of the knife, which is going to take this just piece of metal right here and start shaping it into a knife. We need to scribe an edge that we can grind to. You can mark this out with Sharpie, or I go back to my trusty old blue layout fluid, my Dykem, and I'll lay that out just like that. Piece of cake, right? Let that dry and we'll scribe a line on there. I'll put a link below for the Dykem. I went ahead and brought over my granite surface plate. This is what I do all my layout on. You can use any flat surface to do this. I know that this series is aimed more for the beginner knife maker, but that doesn't mean that you can't use good equipment right off the bat. This is not very expensive either. This is something that's almost invaluable in my shop. This allows me to use this height gauge right here for layout. This is what I'm going to use in the video to mark my center line on the knife. You could use a drill bit. What you would do is you would mic the thickness of the blade, find a drill bit slightly smaller, because that way the point of the drill bit won't run directly down the center, and I'll show you why that's important. When you grind these bevels, you do not want to grind to a point where this is sharp yet. We're not there. You're going to want to leave this edge about the thickness of a dime for multiple reasons. The main reason is after heat treatment, you're going to have scale that you need to remove, and you're not going to want that edge to be thin yet. The secondary reason is, especially in your first knives, if you don't get your grind lines perfect and you've got more material on one side or the other and your grinds aren't perfectly flat, then your cross-sectional density is going to vary, and that can cause warps during heat treat. It's very, very common on your first couple knives to get a slight warp along the edge. So if you leave that edge slightly thick, about the thickness of a dime, then that it affords you a slightly larger amount of material to work that warp out, and it just kind of gives you a little leeway. So here we go. I'm going to show you what this is. I'm going to go ahead and take a measurement here. There we go. Now I can take it down to halfway and I'll scribe the line for you. See how perfect those are when you use the right tool, that height gauge. Once again, I'll put a link down below for it if you're interested in picking up any of these tools for your own shop. I guarantee you, even if you decide not to get into knife making, you'll use these tools for other different various tasks in your shop. Back to the blue layout die. Now we've established our edge here. Let's go ahead and put just a little line right there, right down the center of the knife. That's where we're gonna mark for how high the bevels are gonna go. Right there. Just throw some down on both sides. You notice I'm not painting the whole blade. There's no reason to waste it. This Dykem lasts forever. I've made knives for 5 years. This is a $10 bottle and I've still got some left. Every knife I've used this blue stuff on, so just get this to dry. Plus it smells really good, I think. Alright. So once we get the edge established, which we just did, now we're going to want to take our calipers and mark this top line right here. That's going to be another reference line for us. So we're going to decide how far up on the blade that we want to grind to, set the caliper, and then run the calipers up like this on that blade to give us a grind to line. Alright, so we went ahead and added a little more layout die. We're going to figure out the height of the bevels. That's where we're going to put a reference line for us to grind to. That's pretty good. It's just a reference line. This is pre-heat treat. Once again, it's not super crucial. Okay, and we figured out that we wanted this to lay forward at about that angle right there. So let's just kind of give ourselves some reference lines to put this guy on, and we're going to slide this on and clamp it in place. This is the bevel jig that I was just talking about. You can make one of these really easily. I strongly recommend using one of these. I made a lot of knives without this. This made all the difference in the world. This bevel jig right here. I bought this one from Jantz. It was about 50 bucks, but I would just make one if I were you. It's just a couple pieces of steel with the hole drilled through it. What you could do is clamp your two pieces together, drill a hole through it, screw your screws in, and then square up both sides at the same time. Done. Piece of cake. Okay, let's walk over to the grinder and get this thing turning into a knife. I'm standing at my grinder and I wanted to show you these lines right here. These are my grind to lines that I left about the thickness of a dime in there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to step up to my grinder and I'm going to grind a shallow facet, the total length of the edge, where I grind right to that line but don't blow past it. It's very important not to go past your line because then you lose your reference point. We're going to grind right up to it with a shallow grind. Okay, there's the shallow facet that I was telling you about. Right there. Now that we've got the shallow facets ground in on both sides, right to our grind to lines, we're no longer going to grind to these lines. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a secondary cut. Now when we come up to the grinding surface here, we're going to lay it right on this apex, right on this ridge line right here, and you're going to see a new facet, a new flat coming in right here. And what happens is you're going to work this flat towards this line and towards the edge at the same time. And you can modulate the pressure up and down so that you can get the line to work up or work down. You can see it right there really well. You can see what I'm talking about really well right there. So you can see I'm grinding up and it stops right there. You can see that line right there where I've got this secondary flat right here. Right here, this secondary flat is what I'm working right now. So I'll work this flat up and down at the same time. And what I really want is I want this flat to meet this line and this edge at the same time. Another tip for walking up to the grinder is you take your knife, and the idea is this hand is just pulling through. That's all it's doing. So literally you're putting pressure with this hand. I'm pushing against the knife right now, and this hand just pulls the knife through. So if you take and grab onto this side really strong, you tend to move the knife in and out, which causes you to get dips in here. Where what you really want to do is leave this hand pretty limp, and then just use it to pull through, and that's going to help out a lot. So what you want to do is you want to read your grind lines. So what I'm seeing here is I'm doing pretty good. This is a nice even distance between where my grind stops and the line that I'm working to, and I've got a nice even distance right here to the edge. Now say this had a lot more blue out here, then that would tell me that I needed to do some more grinding here before I clean all this up. So right now, since this is nice and even, I can take long even strokes across the whole thing, and it's going to continue to grind even. But you need to recognize problems right when they start happening. So if I had a big lump right here in the middle that wasn't getting ground, I would need to focus and dwell on that area just slightly longer to get it to catch up to the rate at which everything else is grinding. But this is looking good, so I'm going to keep going. Okay, that's looking pretty good for right now. I'm liking that. It didn't go quite to my line, but it's looking even. I do want to show you, I made a mistake right here. And this is a really common mistake to make, where when I came up to the grinder, I let the knife lay into it and my abrasive belt went right up over the flat. I didn't go too deep, so this will be able to be sanded out, but this is definitely a common mistake, and I did it. Oops. Go in and do the other side. That's right off the grinder. There's a lot of different ways that you can make knives. I only grind with the 36 grip belt before I heat treat. That's it, because I'm going to do all my cleanup after heat treat. No big deal. Got that edge thickness that we were talking about right there. That dime edge thickness. The biggest deal on grinding is that your grinds are symmetrical from this side to this side. That's why you mark out lines, and you want the same amount of distance on each side. It's all about the cross-sectional density. So here, let me put it to you this way. if you grind this line all the way to the top and you grind this line to where it's at right there, that would mean that this side would have more material on it. And I think what really happens is when you heat treat it and you put this in the quench oil, the side with more material would get hard faster, and it would tend to pull the material towards the side that had more mass, and that's what causes warps. So if you have an uneven grind, you know, a little bit more here, a little bit more here, a little bit more there, when you quench it, the metal's going to be pulled to the different areas of mass. Generally speaking, if I have a good symmetrical grind, I almost never have a warp. So this is what we started with, and this is where we're at right now. We've got the knife completely profiled, the profiles cut in, then we drilled our handle holes, our pin holes for the handle, and then I showed you how to grind a rough bevel in there. Now it's ready for some heat treating.